Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was sorted into Gryffindor at Hogwarts. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain fell in relentless, dreary sheets against the window of the Midoriya apartment, mirroring the silent storm in Izuku's heart. He was 10 years old, a milestone that should have been filled with excitement, and the burgeoning promise of a future. For him, it felt like a final sentence. The room, a vibrant shrine to heroism, was a cruel joke. Posters of grinning, powerful figures stared down at him. Intricately detailed action figures stood frozen in dynamic poses on his shelves, and at the center of it all, the computer monitor glowed, a portal to a world he could only ever watch. On the screen, a mountain of a man stood amidst roaring flames, his golden hair like twin horns defying the smoke and chaos. He held a dozen people on a single, impossibly broad shoulder, a grin splitting his shadowed face. The video was old, grainy, the audio distorted, but the power was undeniable. It was All Might's debut. "It's fine now," the figure on the screen boomed, his voice a force of nature that seemed to shake the cheap speakers of Izuku's desktop. "Why?" "Because I am here!" A fresh wave of tears welled in Izuku's eyes, hot and bitter. He squeezed them shut, but the image was seared onto the inside of his eyelids. "I am here." 3 simple words that had inspired a generation, that had single-handedly lowered crime rates, that had become a global promise of safety. For Izuku, they were a brand, marking him as separate, as other. He could never be there. Not like that. His hand trembled as he reached for the mouse, his other arm clutching a worn All Might figure so tightly the plastic creaked. His finger hovered over the replay button. This was his ritual of self-inflicted pain. He had watched the video 10,346 times. He knew because he'd started keeping a tally in a small notebook, the same way he meticulously catalogued every hero, every quirk, every support item, every ultimate move. It was an obsession born from a desperate, dying hope. "Izuku, honey?" His mother's voice was soft, hesitant, from the doorway. Inko Midoriya was a kind woman with a perpetually worried expression that had deepened over the years. She held a plate of freshly cut apple slices, shaped like little bunnies. "A peace offering. You've been in here for hours. Don't you want a snack?" He didn't turn around. "I'm okay, Mom." His voice was thick with unshed tears, a pathetic wobble he couldn't control. He heard her sigh, a sound heavy with a mother's helpless love. She came further into the room, the gentle scent of her floral perfume mixing with the rain-soaked air. "The doctor said," she began, and then stopped. They both knew what the doctor had said. 2 joints in his pinky toe. A death knell for a 4-year-old's dream. At 10, it was an accepted, unchangeable fact of his existence, a label as permanent as his name, quirkless. In a world where 80% of the population was extraordinary, he was a relic. A ghost of a bygone era. "I know what the doctor said," Izuku mumbled, staring at the paused frame of All Might's triumphant smile. "He said I should give up." Inko placed the plate on his desk, her hand gently settling on his shoulder. He flinched not from her touch, but from the chasm of pity he felt emanating from it. "He didn't say that, sweetie. He just meant, maybe you could find a different dream. You could be a police officer. They're heroes too. Or a doctor. You're so smart, you could save people that way." He finally turned, his green eyes, wide and swimming with misery, meeting hers. "But it's not the same. They can't stop a villain like Death Arms. They can't save 100 people from a fire like Backdraft. They can't smile in the face of danger and make everyone feel safe. Only All Might can do that. Only a hero with a powerful quirk can do that." His voice cracked on the last word. The dream wasn't just about saving people. It was about becoming that symbol. That pillar of hope. And the foundation for that pillar was power. Power he would never have. Inko's own eyes glistened. She pulled him into a hug, burying his face in her soft apron. "Oh, Izuku. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He didn't hug her back. He just let his tears finally fall, soaking the fabric of her clothes, each drop a tiny surrender. It was in the midst of this quiet tableau of despair that a new sound cut through the drumming of the rain. Tap. 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 It was sharp and insistent, coming from the window. Izuku pulled away from his mother, his brow furrowed. It wasn't the sound of a tree branch. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Inko looked towards the window, her expression puzzled. Is that a bird? Tap. 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 The sound was more urgent now. Izuku, his curiosity momentarily eclipsing his sadness, crept towards the window. He wiped the condensation away with his sleeve and peered out. His breath hitched. Perched on the narrow ledge, looking utterly unbothered by the downpour, was an owl. It was a large, tawny creature with enormous, intelligent amber eyes that seemed to be staring directly at him. Clutched in its beak was a thick, yellowish envelope. And now? Inko whispered, joining him at the window. In the city? In this weather? The owl hooted, a low, resonant sound, and nudged the letter against the glass pane. It was clearly waiting. Hesitantly, Inko unlatched the window and slid it open just a crack. The owl wasted no time. It swooped gracefully into the room, water droplets flying from its wings, and landed with a soft rustle on Izuku's desk, right next to the plate of apple bunnies. It imperiously dropped the envelope and then began preening its damp feathers, occasionally eyeing the apples with interest. Izuku and Inko could only stare, dumbfounded. The world of quirks was strange, but this was a different kind of strange. This felt ancient. Fictional. The envelope itself was the strangest part. It was made of heavy parchment, not paper. The address was written in shimmering, emerald green ink, each letter a perfect, elegant curl. There was no stamp, and the address was unnervingly specific. Mr. I. Midoriya, the smallest bedroom, apartment 7, Muzutafu Heights, Muzutafu, Japan. His name. His room. He reached for it with a trembling hand, his fingers tracing the wax seal on the back. It was a crest, a shield divided into 4 quadrants, bearing the images of a lion, a serpent, an eagle, and a badger, all centered around a large letter H. Who is it from? Inko asked, her voice a nervous whisper. Izuku carefully broke the seal. The wax crumbled under his thumb, and he unfolded the letter. The same emerald ink covered the page inside. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore. Order of Merlin, First Class, Grand Source. CHF. Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, International Confede. Of Wizards. Dear Mr. Midoriya, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on September 1st. We await your owl by no later than July 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. Izuku read it once. Then twice. His analytical mind, the one he used to deconstruct hero fights, tried to process the words. Witchcraft. Wizardry. Hogwarts. It sounded like something from a fantasy novel. Was this a prank? A very elaborate, very cruel prank? Who would go to the trouble of training an owl just to mock the quirkless kid who clung to impossible dreams? He looked at the second page, a list of bizarre items, a wand, a cauldron, pewter, standard size 2 robes, spellbooks with titles like A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration and Magical Drafts and Potions. Mom, he said, his voice flat. It's a joke. It has to be, but the owl was still there, now cautiously nibbling on an apple bunny. It seemed far too real for a joke. Before Inko could respond, there was a knock at the apartment door. It wasn't the sharp rap of a delivery person, but a series of 3 gentle, polite knocks. Inko jumped. Who could that be? She fretted, wringing her hands. I'm not expecting anyone. She hurried to the door, peering through the peephole. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my! She fumbled with the locks and opened the door. Standing in the hallway was a man who looked like a walking skeleton. He was impossibly tall and gaunt, his clothes hanging loosely on his skeletal frame. His face was all sharp angles and deep shadows, with 2 bright, sunken blue eyes that seemed to hold a surprising amount of warmth. A shock of unruly blonde hair fell across his forehead. He looked profoundly ill, yet he offered a small, hesitant smile. Izuku recognized him instantly, though he'd only ever seen grainy photos online. It was Toshinori Yagi, All Might's rumored civilian form, a topic of intense debate on hero forums. But what was he doing here? At their door? "Good afternoon, Midoriya-san," the man said, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone who looked so intimidating. He gave a slight bow. "My name is Toshinori Yagi. May I come in? I believe you've just received some unusual mail." He gestured with a long, bony finger towards the owl, which hooted in acknowledgement before snatching another apple slice. Stunned into silence, Inko could only nod and step aside. Toshinori entered, ducking his head to clear the door frame. He moved with a quiet grace that belied his frail appearance. His eyes scanned the room, lingering for a moment on the All Might posters with a complicated, unreadable expression before settling on Izuku. "Young Midoriya," he said, his gaze soft. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." Izuku's brain felt like it was short-circuiting. All Might, Toshinori Yagi, was in his room, standing next to a magical owl, holding a letter about a wizard school. He felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. You're... Izuku stammered, pointing a shaky finger. Toshinori's smile widened slightly. "I am. But that's not why I'm here today. I'm here as a representative of the Japanese Ministry of Magic, and as a friend of Hogwarts." Inko finally found her voice. "Ministry of Magic? I don't understand. Is this a television show? Are you from a TV studio?" Toshinori chuckled, a dry, wheezing sound. He gestured to their small dining table. "Please sit. This will take some explaining. And I apologize in advance, Mrs. Midoriya. There are things your husband should have told you." The mention of his father sent a jolt through Izuku. Hisashi Midoriya was an enigma, a man who had been working abroad for as long as Izuku could remember. All he had were a few photos and his mother's vague, loving descriptions. They sat at the table, the owl watching them like a feathered chaperone. Toshinori placed his hands on the table, his long fingers steepled. "The world is much larger and much stranger than most people know," he began. "For centuries, two distinct forms of human potential have existed side by side. The first is what you know as quirks, a biological phenomenon, a next step in human evolution. The second is magic." He flicked his wrist, a casual, almost lazy motion. A small, brilliant ball of golden light, warm and bright as a miniature sun, bloomed in the air above his hand. It hovered there, pulsating gently. Izuku gasped. Inko's eyes went wide. It wasn't a quirk. There was no telltale sign of physical strain, no shifting of biology. It was something else entirely. Something pure. "Magic is an ancient energy, inherent in certain bloodlines," Toshinori continued, letting the light dissipate into soft motes. "Those who can wield it are called witches and wizards. For our own safety and to maintain global stability, the magical world has remained hidden from the non-magical world, the Muggle world, as it's called in Britain, for over 300 years under an international statute of secrecy." He looked at Inko, his expression full of sympathy. "Your husband, Hisashi Midoriya, was a wizard. A very talented one. He worked for our ministry as an aura, an elite dark wizard catcher. It's a dangerous job, and the secrecy required, it forces difficult choices. He loved you both very much, but he couldn't share his world with you without putting you in grave danger." Inko was pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Hisashi, a wizard? That's why he was always so secretive. All those business trips, he was protecting you," Toshinori affirmed gently. "And from him, your son has inherited the gift of magic." He turned his gaze to Izuku, who was staring at him, his mind racing, connecting dots he never knew existed. "But I'm quirkless," Izuku whispered. The word felt hollow now, insignificant in the face of this revelation. "Yes," Toshinori said, a flicker of something like pride in his eyes. "You are. Magic and quirks are separate phenomena, drawn from different wells of potential. It is exceedingly rare for them to coexist in one person. You did not inherit a quirk, young Midoriya. You inherited magic. Latent, untapped, but powerful. The letter you received is a summons, Hogwarts is one of the finest magical schools in the world, and they have offered you a place. Hogwarts. A school for wizards. For him. A place where he wouldn't be the odd one out, the broken one. He would be like everyone else. No, he would be special. But his dream, the one that was tattooed on his soul, resurfaced. But I want to be a hero. Like you. Can wizards be pro-heroes? This was the question that hung in the balance, the one that would determine if this was a new path or just a different kind of dead end. Taishinori's smile faded, replaced by a look of profound seriousness. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, and the frail man seemed to vanish, replaced by the gravitas of the symbol of peace. The path of a wizard is not the path of a modern pro-hero, he said, his voice low and steady. The laws of our world are strict. We do not intervene in Muggle affairs, even with the prevalence of quirks. Our worlds must remain separate. So no. You cannot use magic to get a hero license and fight villains on television. Izuku's heart plummeted. There it was. The rejection. The same dead end, just with a fancier name. The tears he thought he'd spent returned with a vengeance. Then what's the point? He choked out, the letter clutched in his fist. It's just another thing I can't do. Another power that's useless for my dream. You think so? Tashinori countered, his voice sharp but not unkind. Do you think heroism is about fame and television interviews? Is that why you admire All Might? Izuku flinched as if struck. No. It's about saving people. It's about making them feel safe. Exactly, Tashinori said, his intensity softening. And there are countless ways to save people. The wizarding world has its own heroes, young Midoriya. They just don't have flashy costumes or catchphrases. We have healers, who can mend wounds that even the best quirk-enhanced doctors cannot. We have curse-breakers, who venture into ancient tombs to disarm deadly traps and protect the world from dark artifacts. We have magizoologists who protect endangered magical creatures. And we have aurists, like your father, who stand as the last line of defense against the darkest forces imaginable. He paused, letting the words sink in. Being a hero isn't about the power you have. It's about what you do with it. It's about your resolve. Your spirit. I've watched you for a while, young Midoriya. I saw your files when your name appeared on the Hogwarts registry. I saw your school records, your analysis notebooks. He nodded towards the shelf where they were neatly stacked. That mind of yours, that unshakable desire to help others even when you yourself are powerless, that is the essence of a true hero. Magic isn't giving you a new dream, it's giving you a new set of tools to achieve the one you've always had. All Might, Tashinori, wasn't offering him one for all. He was offering him something else. Something that was entirely his own. A different path, yes, but one that led to the same destination, saving people with a smile. A single, hesitant spark of hope ignited in the cold, desolate landscape of his heart. It was small, fragile, but it was there. He looked from Tashinori to his mother. Inko was looking at him, her fear warring with a dawning sense of wonder. She saw the spark in her son's eyes, a light she hadn't seen since the day of his diagnosis. Izuku, she said softly. Your father, he would have wanted you to have this chance. To be who you were meant to be. Izuku looked down at the letter, at the elegant green ink. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It wasn't a joke. It was an invitation. A lifeline. He took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded, his decision made. I'll go. The transition from the mundane to the magical was dizzying. Tashinori arranged everything. He explained to Inko that Hisashi had left a sizable inheritance in a Gringotts wizarding bank vault, more than enough to cover tuition and supplies. A few days later, he escorted them not to Diagon Alley, but to a hidden district tucked away behind a nondescript temple in Kyoto, a place the Japanese magical community called Mahadokoro Market. It was a chaotic, vibrant explosion of color and sound. Lanterns painted with moving kanji floated in the air, shop signs shifted and reformed, and the air buzzed with strange enchantments and the scent of exotic herbs. The most profound moment came at the wand shop. It was a dusty, ancient place run by a wizened old man who looked as old as the gnarled wood of the building. He took one look at Izuku and hummed, A late bloomer, he'd said, his voice like rustling leaves. The magic is strong, but shy. It needs a gentle hand, but a brave heart. He had Izuku try wand after wand. An oak wand caused a stack of books to burst into flames. A cherry wand shot green sparks that singed the old man's eyebrows. But then, he presented a simple, pale wand. Willow, 10¼ inches. Phoenix feather core. A wand for potential, for overcoming adversity. Difficult to master, but fiercely loyal. The moment Izuku's fingers wrapped around the smooth wood, he felt it. A jolt, not of electricity, but of warmth, of belonging. It shot up his arm and settled in his chest, a comforting, powerful hum. Golden and green sparks erupted from the tip, dancing in the air like fireflies before fading. It felt like coming home. The trip to London was a blur, arranged via a high-speed international port key that felt like being hooked behind the navel and yanked through a whirlwind of color. And now, he stood on platform 9¾ at King's Cross Station, a place that shouldn't exist but most certainly did. The magnificent scarlet engine of the Hogwarts Express hissed steam, a majestic beast ready to carry him to his new life. Inko fussed over him, straightening his new black robes for the 10th time, her eyes wet. Oh, Izuku. Be safe. Study hard. And make lots of friends. I will, Mom, he promised, his own voice thick. He hugged her tightly, breathing in her familiar scent one last time. And remember what Yagi-san said? She whispered in his ear. You already have the heart of a hero. Now you just have to learn the spells. He pulled away, gave her a wobbly but determined smile, and boarded the train. He found an empty compartment, stowed his trunk, and sat by the window, watching his mother wave until the train rounded a bend and she was gone. He was alone, truly alone, for the first time in his life, rocketing towards a future he couldn't possibly imagine. The familiar knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. What if he couldn't do it? What if he was as bad at magic as he was at, well, everything else? His muttering started before he even realized it. Okay, so first day is crucial for making a good impression. Need to be prepared. I've read the first 3 chapters of A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, but the theory on inanimate to inanimate object transformation is complex. Does the intrinsic nature of the object affect the required magical output, or is it purely about the wizard's intent and visualization? What if, excuse me? Izuku jumped, his muttering cut short. A boy with a mop of fiery red hair and a smudge of dirt on his nose stood in the doorway. He was tall, lanky, and covered in freckles. Is this seat taken? The boy asked, gesturing to the spot opposite Izuku. Everywhere else is full. Oh. And no, it's free. Please, Izuku stammered, scooting closer to the window. The boy grinned and plopped down, sighing in relief. Brilliant. I'm Ron, by the way. Ron Weasley, Izuku Midoriya, he replied, giving a small bow out of habit. Ron's eyes widened. Midoriya? Like Japanese? Wicked. My dad works at the Ministry, in the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office. He's obsessed with Muggle stuff. He'd go spare if he met someone from Japan. He's always going on about their manga and karaoke. Izuku couldn't help but smile. It's karaoke. See? Wicked, Ron said, leaning forward conspiratorially. So, you're a first year too? You look a bit nervous. A little, Izuku admitted. Well, my dad was a wizard, but I was raised non-magically. It's all new to me. Aha, half-blood then, Ron said matter-of-factly. Nothing wrong with that. Most of us are these days. My whole family's magic. 6 older brothers. It's a nightmare. He shuddered dramatically. So, if you were raised as a muggle, do you know about pro-heroes? Izuku's eyes lit up, the anxiety momentarily forgotten. Do I know about them? I can name every hero in the top 100, their quirks, their support agencies, and their debut years. My favorite is All Might, of course. His strength, his charisma, the way he saves everyone with a smile. He was about to launch into a full-blown analysis when he saw Ron's expression. The redhead was staring at him, his mouth agape, his eyes shining with pure, unadulterated awe. You've seen him? All Might? In person? Ron whispered, as if speaking of a deity. On TV. Lots of times, blimey, Ron breathed. My brother Charlie saw him once, when he was on an exchange in Japan. Said he lifted a whole collapsed bridge. A whole bridge! Dad has a bootleg magical photo of him. He's huge. Suddenly, the compartment door slid open again. A girl with bushy brown hair and rather large front teeth stood there, already dressed in her Hogwarts robes. She looked at them with an air of brisk authority. Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one. Ron and Izuku shook their heads. The girl's eyes, sharp and intelligent, flickered between them. She noticed a book in Izuku's lap. Hogwarts, a history. Oh, are you a first year? I've learned all our course books by heart, of course. I just hope it's enough. I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. Her gaze then fell on Izuku, and a flicker of intense curiosity crossed her face. You're Izuku Midoriya, aren't you? I read about the international students in modern magical education. You're from Japan. Is it true that over 80% of the non-magical population there has developed innate biological abilities known as quirks? That's fascinating. From a magical theory perspective, it's a confounding variable. Are they related to ambient magical exposure? Or is it a completely separate evolutionary track? What's the leading scientific theory? She fired off the questions like a machine gun, leaving Izuku blinking in astonishment. Ron looked utterly bewildered. Izuku began, his brain kicking into its familiar analytical gear. Well, the prevailing theory is the quark singularity, which posits that as generations pass, quarks will become too powerful and complex to control, but the biological origin is still debated. Some scientists think it's a dormant gene activated by a virus, while others, he was cut off by the arrival of the trolley witch. Anything off the trolley, dears? Ron, who had been listening to Izuku with a glazed expression, lit up. He bought a mountain of sweets, introducing Izuku to the wonders of chocolate frogs and Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. Hermione, after a brief, disapproving sniff, returned to her search for the toad. For the rest of the journey, Ron regaled Izuku with tales of the magical world, while Izuku, in turn, tried to explain the complex society of heroes and villains. For the first time, he was talking about his passion and not being met with pity or ridicule, but with genuine, wide-eyed interest. He was making a friend. By the time the Hogwarts Express pulled into Hogsmeade Station, night had fallen. Izuku followed the river of students off the train, his heart thumping in his chest. A booming voice cut through the chatter. First years! First years over here! Come on, follow me! A giant of a man, at least twice as tall as a normal person, held a lantern aloft. This had to be Hagrid, the groundskeeper. Following him down a dark, narrow path, Izuku, Ron, and Hermione huddled together. The path opened up, and a collective gasp swept through the first years. Across a vast, black lake, perched atop a high mountain, was a castle. It was a breathtaking silhouette of turrets and towers, its windows blazing with warm light against the starry sky. It was Hogwarts. It was real. And it was more magnificent than anything he had ever imagined. They crossed the lake in a fleet of small boats that moved on their own, the castle growing larger and more imposing with every second. Professor McGonagall, a stern-looking woman with her hair in a tight bun, met them at the castle doors. She led them into the magnificent entrance hall and then into the great hall for the sorting ceremony. Izuku's jaw dropped. The hall was vast, lit by thousands of floating candles. 4 long tables were packed with students, and at the head of the hall sat the teachers. But the most incredible part was the ceiling. It wasn't a ceiling at all, but a perfect, velvety black sky, dotted with glittering stars. It's bewitched to look like the sky outside, Hermione whispered from beside him. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history. Professor McGonagall placed a rickety stool in front of the students and on it, a frayed, patched, and utterly filthy pointed wizard's hat. Then, a rip near the brim opened wide like a mouth, and the hat began to sing a song about the 4 school founders and the qualities they prized. Izuku felt a wave of nausea. A singing hat was going to decide his future? What if it made a mistake? What if it said he didn't belong here at all? The sorting began. Names were called, and one by one, students sat on the stool, put on the hat, and were sorted. Ravenclaw! Hufflepuff! Slytherin! Izuku noticed Katsuki Bakugo, his childhood friend turned tormentor, get sorted almost instantly. The hat barely touched his spiky blonde hair before shouting, Slytherin! Of course, Bakugo's ambition and his quirk-fueled arrogance made him a perfect fit. He swaggered to the Slytherin table, shooting a dismissive glare across the hall that Izuku felt like a physical blow. Granger! Hermione! Hermione marched to the stool, her face a mask of intense concentration. The hat was on her head for a full minute before it finally yelled, Gryffindor! Weasley! Ron! Ron, pale and green around the gills, stumbled forward. The hat took one look at him and shouted, Gryffindor! Finally, Professor McGonagall called out, Midoriya, Izuku! A hush fell over the hall as whispers broke out. The one from Japan? Is it true he's quirkless? His legs felt like lead as he walked to the stool. He felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on him. He sat down, and McGonagall placed the hat on his head. It slipped down over his eyes, plunging him into darkness. A small voice whispered in his ear, a voice that was inside his own head. Well now, this is a mind unlike any I have seen in centuries. So much data, so much analysis. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 1 through 13, fascinating. A mind sharp enough for Ravenclaw, no doubt about it. Ravenclaw? Izuku thought, panicked. But I'm not that smart. Oh, you are. But there's more. A deep, profound loyalty. A desire to work hard not for glory, but because it is the right thing to do. You would do well in Hufflepuff, where the kind and the just find their home. The hat paused. And yet, there is ambition here. A burning need to prove them all wrong. The doctor, your classmates, Bakugo, a desire to stand at the top. Slytherin could help you on the path to greatness, make no mistake. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. Not Slytherin. Anywhere but Slytherin. No? Very well. The hat mused. But beneath all of this, the mind, the loyalty, the ambition, there is something else. Something that overshadows everything. A reckless, all-consuming, self-destructive drive to save others. You ran toward the troll, not away. You would throw yourself in front of a curse for a stranger. You possess a courage that you yourself do not see, a willingness to stand for others even when you are shaking with fear. There is only one place for a spirit like that. It must be Gryffindor. The last word was shouted to the entire hall. The hat was lifted from his head. The Gryffindor table erupted in cheers. He saw Ron and Hermione clapping wildly. Dazed, he stumbled over to them, a grin spreading across his face. He'd done it. He belonged. He sat down between Ron and a red-headed older boy who introduced himself as Percy Weasley. The headmaster, Albus Dumbledore, gave a few cryptic warnings, and then the feast appeared. Food of every description materialized on the golden plates, and Izuku ate until he was fit to burst. Ron, between mouthfuls of chicken, was still starstruck. So you're quirkless heroes? They just train their bodies? And use support gear? That's mental. It's like fighting a dragon with a pointy stick. Hermione, who had polished off her plate with neat efficiency, leaned across the table, her eyes gleaming. Forget the physical aspect, the sociological implications are what's truly fascinating. A society where power is quantifiable and categorizable from birth must have incredibly rigid social strata. Does the government regulate quirk usage? Is there a tiered system for hero licenses based on power levels? What are the ethical guidelines for quirks that affect the mind? Izuku, full of food and warmth and a sense of overwhelming relief, found himself smiling. A real, genuine smile. He looked from Ron's friendly, awestruck face to Hermione's intense, brilliant curiosity. He looked at the enchanted ceiling, at the floating candles, at the banners of the Scarlet Lion hanging above him. At the beginning of the day, his room had felt like a prison, a monument to a broken dream. Now, sitting in the great hall of Hogwarts, he felt a hope so bright and powerful it threatened to consume him. He hadn't been given a quirk. He hadn't been told he could be the next All Might. He had been given something infinitely more precious, a chance. A beginning. And for the first time in a long, long time, Izuku Midoriya felt like a hero in training. The first week at Hogwarts passed in a dizzying whirlwind of new sights, sounds, and sensations. Izuku Midoriya, for the first time in his life, felt the intoxicating thrill of a fresh start. He was no longer Deku, the quirkless, pathetic dreamer. Here, he was Izuku Midoriya, the Gryffindor from Japan, a curiosity, a half-blood with a unique perspective. The weight that had settled on his shoulders since he was 4 years old had, if not vanished, at least lightened considerably. He walked the hallowed halls with a tentative spring in his step, his mind alight with a million new possibilities. His diligence, once a source of mockery, immediately became his greatest asset. He was the first to wake in the Gryffindor dormitory, the cool pre-dawn light finding him already hunched over a textbook at his bedside table, a self-inking quill scratching furiously across parchment. His trunk was a marvel of organization, his robes perfectly folded, his books arranged by subject and then by the complexity of their material. He had even started a new notebook, bound in sturdy green leather that matched his eyes. The cover, in his neatest, most precise handwriting, read, Heroic Magic Spell Application, Volume 1. It was in the classrooms where the chasm between his past and his present became most apparent. The theoretical aspects of magic were a paradise for his analytical mind. In history of magic, taught by the ghostly, droning Professor Binns, most students viewed the class as a prime opportunity for a nap. Ron's head would loll onto his textbook within minutes, and even Hermione's eyelids would occasionally grow heavy. But Izuku sat ramrod straight, utterly captivated. Bin's monotone voice, which seemed to suck the very life out of the air, was detailing the mid-17th century goblin rebellions. And so, Grin got the first declared that all goblin-wrought silver rightfully belonged to the maker, not the purchaser, leading to the, the Great Schism of 1631. While others doodled or passed notes, Izuku's quill flew. He wasn't just transcribing dates. He was cross-referencing, analyzing, his mind making connections that no one else seemed to consider. He muttered under his breath, a habit he was trying desperately but failing to break. So the goblin's concept of ownership is fundamentally different, based on creation rather than transaction. That's a key socio-economic stressor, similar to the pre-quirk debates on intellectual property rights versus physical labor. But if the wizards provided the raw materials, doesn't that imply a joint venture? The legislative framework of the time was clearly inadequate to handle such a nuanced dispute. Was there any attempt at arbitration before the hostilities? The texts only mention the wizard-led council's decree, which seems inherently biased. Hermione, sitting beside him, shot him a look of mingled astonishment and admiration. She was used to being the most attentive student in any class, but Izuku was operating on another level. Professor Binns? Izuku's voice, though quiet, cut through the sleepy haze of the classroom. The ghost stopped his lecture, seeming momentarily surprised that a student was conscious, let alone willing to speak. Yes. Mr. Midoriya, sir, Izuku said, his face flushing at the sudden attention. I was just wondering, the accounts all focus on the goblin rebellions, but were there any major goblin-led economic sanctions against the wizarding economy prior to the violence? Given their control of the banking system, a coordinated withdrawal of services or a freeze on assets would have been a far more effective tool than open warfare. Was that ever attempted? The classroom was silent. Even Ron sat up, blinking. The question was so far beyond the scope of the lesson that it seemed to have come from another century. Professor Binns floated a few inches closer, his pearly eyes regarding Izuku with a flicker of something that might have been interest. An astute question, Mr. Midoriya. Indeed, the Grodbik faction did attempt a short-lived asset freeze in 1628, but it was undermined by the rival Ragnarok clan, who saw it as an opportunity to curry favor with the ministry. The resulting internal goblin conflict weakened their position significantly. That is not in your textbook. 5 points to Gryffindor for insightful analysis. A ghostly nod was all the acknowledgement he gave before resuming his lecture, but the effect was electric. Hermione stared at Izuku, her mind clearly racing to catch up. Ron just shook his head in disbelief. Blimey, Izuku, he whispered. You made Binns interesting. I think that's a first in about 100 years. The same pattern emerged in Charms theory with the diminutive Professor Flitwick. While the class learned the basic principles of levitation charms, Izuku filled pages with intricate diagrams of wand movements, charting the optimal angles for lift versus thrust. He theorized about the relationship between an object's mass and the caster's willpower, postulating a formula that looked more like advanced physics than simple magic. His notebooks were becoming legendary. They were no longer just about heroes. Now, they contained detailed entries on every spell they discussed. Each entry had a section for the incantation, wand movement, theoretical principles, potential applications, both standard and unconventional, and most importantly, a section titled Heroic Application. For Wingardium Leviosa, he hadn't just written, "Makes things float." He'd sketched out scenarios, lifting debris off a trapped civilian, creating a temporary bridge across a chasm, disarming a foe by levitating their own weapon, even a complex theory about levitating dust particles in the air to create a smokescreen for a tactical retreat. He was in his element. He was learning, growing, building a new foundation for his dream. The theory was sound. The logic was flawless. The only problem was the magic itself. The moment theory had to be put into practice, the brilliant, analytical mind of Izuku Midoriya slammed into a wall of solid fear. The wall had been built brick by brick over 6 long years, mortared with every pitying look, every dismissive sneer, every time Bakugo had called him a useless, quirkless Deku. It was a mental block so profound, so deeply ingrained, that it sabotaged him before he even began. In their first practical class, herbology with the warm and matronly Professor Sprout, they were tasked with repotting screaming mandrake seedlings. The instructions were simple. Wear the earmuffs, pull the mandrake firmly, and plunge it into the new pot. As soon as Izuku pulled the screeching plant baby from its soil, a jolt of panic seized him. The cry, muffled though it was by the earmuffs, sounded like every child he'd ever dreamed of failing to save. His hands trembled. He fumbled. The mandrake slipped from his grasp, landing on the floor and letting out a piercing shriek that made several students clutch their heads. Neville Longbottom, a boy so nervous he seemed to vibrate with anxiety, calmly picked up Izuku's mandrake and expertly potted it, giving him a shy, reassuring smile. Izuku could only stammer his thanks, his face burning with a familiar, searing shame. He, the heroic analyst, had been bested by the one thing he was supposed to be good at, a practical task. But it was in the dungeons, in the cold, oppressive atmosphere of the potions classroom, that his inadequacy was laid bare for all to see. The room itself was intimidating, lined with shelves of slimy, pickled things floating in jars. The air was frigid, and their breath plumed in front of them. Their professor, Severus Snape, was even more intimidating. He swept into the room like a great black bat, his sallow face framed by greasy, shoulder-length hair, and his black eyes seeming to pierce through flesh and bone to find every hidden insecurity. His gaze swept across the room, lingering with disdain on the Gryffindors before he began to speak, his voice a silky, menacing whisper that commanded absolute silence. "You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion-making," he began. "As there is little foolish wand-waving here, many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I don't expect you will really understand the beauty of the softly simmering cauldron with its shimmering fumes, the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins, bewitching the mind, and snaring the senses. I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stopper death, if you aren't as big a bunch of dunderheads as I usually have to teach." Izuku, despite his fear, felt a thrill. Stopper death? His mind immediately began to whirl. He means healing potions, obviously. But stopper death implies something more potent, perhaps a stasis potion or something that can counteract even the most fatal poisons. What are the base ingredients? What is the ethical framework for its use? Could it be used in disaster scenarios to preserve critically injured victims until they can be moved to a hospital? Midoriya! Snape's voice cracked like a whip. Izuku jumped, his quill clattering onto the stone floor. "Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Izuku's mind went blank. He knew this. He'd read it. He'd seen it in magical drafts and potions. Asphodel, a type of lily. Wormwood. It was right there, on the tip of his tongue, but Snape's piercing stare had frozen his thoughts. I don't know, sir," he stammered. Snape's lip curled into a sneer. "Tut, tut. Fame clearly isn't everything. Let's try again. Where, Mr. Midoriya, would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? A bezoar." He knew that one. He'd made a specific note on it in his heroic applications section. A stone from the stomach of a goat, an antidote to most poisons. Must have for any field rescue kit, but again, the words wouldn't come. The pressure was too much. I don't know, sir, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. And what is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? I don't know, sir. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest. Pity, Snape said softly, his voice dripping with venom. Clearly, you have inherited your father's notoriety but none of his talent. For your information, asphodel and wormwood make a sleeping potion so powerful it is known as the draught of living death. A bezoar is a stone taken from the stomach of a goat, and it will save you from most poisons. As for monkshood and wolfsbane, they are the same plant, which also goes by the name of aconite. Well, why aren't you all copying that down? A frantic scratching of quills filled the silence. Snape's gaze, however, remained fixed on Izuku, a look of profound, personal disappointment and contempt. But the torment wasn't over. It was a joint class with the Slytherins, and that meant Bakugo. Katsuki Bakugo was in his element. The precise, volatile, and powerful nature of potions seemed to be an extension of his own being. His explosion quirk, while unusable in class, had gifted him with a level of fine motor control and an intuitive understanding of energetic reactions that was unparalleled. Their first assignment was a simple cure for boils. While others struggled, Bakugo moved with an effortless, arrogant grace. His knife was a blur as he diced the horned slugs, each slice perfect, uniform. He crushed the snake fangs with a mortar and pestle, not with brute force, but with a rhythmic, controlled pressure that produced the finest possible powder. He stirred his cauldron with a steady hand, the potion turning the exact shade of turquoise described in the textbook. He wasn't just following a recipe, he seemed to understand it on a primal level. He caught Izuku's eye from across the room and gave a contemptuous smirk. "What's the matter, Deku?" he sneered, his voice a low growl that carried easily across the dungeon. "Can't even handle a simple potion? Still as useless as ever, I see. At least back home you had the excuse of being quirkless. What's your excuse here? Too stupid to read a book?" Snape heard but did nothing, a faint, approving smirk playing on his lips. Izuku's hands began to tremble. "Focus," he told himself. "Just follow the instructions. It's just a series of steps. You can do this." He measured out the dried nettles, his shaking hands spilling some on the table. He tried to crush the snake fangs, but his grip was unsteady, and a chunk flew out of the mortar, skittering across the floor. His face was hot, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He added the horned slugs, but his stirring was uneven, sometimes too fast, sometimes too slow. The potion turned a sickly, murky green instead of turquoise. Then came the final step. The textbook read, in bold letters, "Add 2 porcupine quills and stir. Take cauldron off fire before adding quills." His mind was a maelstrom of Snape's disappointment, Bakugo's mockery, and his own spiraling self-doubt. He read the instruction, but the crucial part didn't register. In his panic, he dropped the porcupine quills directly into the simmering cauldron. The result was instantaneous and catastrophic. The potion let out a loud hiss, and a thick, acrid yellow smoke billowed upwards. A foul-smelling, molten green substance erupted from the cauldron, splashing across the floor and melting holes in the shoes of the students nearest to him. The entire class erupted in panic shouts, scrambling to get away from the bubbling, corrosive mess. Snape moved with terrifying speed. A single, sharp wave of his wand vanished the noxious goo and cleared the smoke. Silence descended once more, thick and heavy with judgment. Snape glided over to Izuku's station, his black robes billowing behind him. He stared down at the ruined cauldron, then at Izuku, his eyes black holes of fury. "You foolish boy," he whispered, his voice dangerously low. "Did you not read the instructions? Or are you simply incapable of basic comprehension? You are a menace. A danger to yourself and your classmates. 20 points from Gryffindor for your breathtaking incompetence. And you will have detention with me every Friday for the next month, where you will scrub every cauldron in this dungeon until you learn to respect the art you so clearly defile." He turned to the rest of the class. "Bakugo," he said, his tone shifting to one of grudging respect. An almost perfect potion. Your technique is adequate. 5 points to Slytherin. Bakugo's chest puffed out. He shot Izuku a look of pure, triumphant scorn. Hear that, Deku? He mouthed silently. Useless. Izuku stood frozen, his face ashen. He had not only failed, he had failed spectacularly, publicly, and dangerously. He had lost points for his house. He had earned the ire of a terrifying professor, and he had proven Bakugo right. He was just as useless here as he had been everywhere else. The fragile hope he had nurtured over the past week shattered into a million pieces. The rest of the day passed in a haze of humiliation. He couldn't look his fellow Gryffindors in the eye. He skipped dinner, hiding in an abandoned corridor on the 7th floor, his back against the cold stone, his knees drawn up to his chest. He replayed the scene in the dungeon over and over in his mind, each replay a fresh wave of shame. What was he even doing here? All the theoretical knowledge in the world was worthless if he couldn't perform the simplest spell. His notebooks, filled with heroic strategies and complex magical theories, seemed like a cruel joke. They were the fantasies of a boy who lived in his head because he was incapable of acting in the real world. There you are! He looked up to see Ron and Hermione approaching, their expressions etched with concern. We were looking for you, Ron said, plopping down beside him. Snape's a git. He's like that with all the Gryffindors. Don't let him get to you. It's not just him. Izuku mumbled, staring at the floor. It's me. Bakugo was right. I'm useless. I can't do it. I can't do any of it. That's not true, Hermione said, sitting on his other side, her tone firm but kind. Your understanding of magical theory is extraordinary, Izuku. I've never seen anyone grasp the concepts so quickly. Practical application is a completely different skill set. It's like knowing everything about how a broomstick flies versus actually being able to ride one. They aren't the same thing, but they're connected, Izuku insisted, his voice cracking. The theory is supposed to inform the practice. For me, it's just a block. When I tried to cast a spell, I feel the magic, like a pressure building up inside me. But right at the last second, my head just screams, you can't do this. You're powerless. And then, it's gone. It just fizzles out. He buried his face in his hands, the confession costing him dearly. I've spent my whole life being told I'm nothing. I guess I finally started to believe it. Ron clapped a hand on his shoulder, his grip surprisingly firm. Well, we don't believe it. So you're rubbish at potions. Big deal. So is half the school. You made a ghost think. That's got to be worth something. Hermione nodded eagerly. He's right. And this mental block you're describing, it's a psychological barrier, not a magical one. That means it can be overcome. You just need to find the right key to unlock it. A breakthrough. Her words, logical and certain, were a small comfort. A breakthrough. It sounded so simple, yet felt so impossible. His chance came the very next day, back in Professor Flitwick's Sunlit Charms classroom. Today was their first practical test, the levitation charm, Wingardium Leviosa. Now, don't forget that lovely wrist movement we've been practicing, Flitwick squeaked from atop his pile of books. The swish and flick. Remember, swish and flick. All around the room, students were trying. Wingardium Leviosa! Ron yelled, waving his wand around like a windmill. His feather didn't move. Hermione, ever the perfectionist, corrected him. You're saying it wrong. It's Wingardium Leviosa. Make the gar nice and long. You do it then if you're so clever. Ron grumbled. Wingardium Leviosa. Hermione enunciated perfectly, performing a neat, crisp swish and flick. Her feather gracefully lifted off the desk and hovered a foot in the air. Oh, well done! Flitwick clapped. Look here, everyone! Miss Granger's done it! Soon, other feathers began to lift, wobbling unsteadily into the air. Even Neville's feather, after much trembling and encouragement, managed a small hop. But Izuku's remained stubbornly inert. He tried again and again. Wingardium Leviosa. Swish and flick. Nothing. Wingardium Leviosa! He put more force into it. The feather twitched, but that was it. He closed his eyes, visualizing the airflow, the magical energy displacing the object's relationship with gravity, the precise willpower needed. Wingardium Leviosa, fizzle. The familiar feeling of the magic gathering in his chest, only to dissipate into nothing at the final moment, leaving behind a cold, empty ache. The wall was still there. Impenetrable. He started muttering, his old coping mechanism kicking in. Maybe the angle is wrong. Flitwick said 15 degrees, but is that relative to the table or the object's center of mass? And the swish part, is it meant to gather ambient magic or channel my own? The book is unclear on that point, it just says, Mr. Midoriya. Professor Flitwick was standing beside his desk, peering up at him with intelligent, bird-like eyes. Izuku fell silent, his face burning. He was failing. Again. You have the theory down perfectly, my boy, Flitwick said, his voice gentle. I've read your essays. Your understanding is postgraduate level. But you are thinking too much. I'm just trying to get it right. Izuku stammered. Indeed. But magic is not an equation, Mr. Midoriya. It is not just logic and angles. It is also intent. Feeling. Flitwick gestured to his feather. You are trying to command it. To force it, you need to persuade it. Why do you want to lift this feather? Izuku blinked. It was a strange question. To pass the lesson? A fine goal, but not a very inspiring one. Flitwick chuckled. Close your eyes. Forget the classroom. Forget the theory. Forget trying to prove anything. I want you to think of a simple, clear reason to make something float. Not a grand battle, not a disaster. Just a small, good thing. A moment where you wanted to help. Can you do that? Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. His mind, for once, went quiet. He pushed aside the images of All Might and burning buildings. He pushed aside Snape's sneer and Bakugo's taunts. A small, good thing. A moment he wanted to help. An image floated into his mind. It was from a few years ago. He was in the library, and a little girl, too short to reach the top shelf, was trying to get a book. She had climbed precariously onto a stool, her little fingers just brushing the spine of the book she wanted. He had seen the stool wobble. He remembered the surge of panic, the desperate, instinctual urge to rush forward and catch her, to catch the book, to stop anything bad from happening. He hadn't been able to do anything but gasp as a librarian swooped in to help. But the feeling, the pure, unadulterated need to help, to protect, that was real. He held on to that feeling. He pictured the little girl, the wobbly stool, the falling book. He imagined reaching out, not with his hands, but with this new power, to gently catch the book and lower it safely into her hands. To see her smile. It wasn't about power or glory. It was about a simple act of kindness. He opened his eyes, his gaze fixed on the feather. He lifted his willow wand, the wood warm and familiar in his hand. He wasn't thinking about the physics anymore. He was thinking about the little girl's smile. He took a breath. The magic gathered in his chest, but this time, it didn't feel like a pressure to be forced out. It felt like a warm, gentle current, flowing down his arm into the wand. The wall in his mind wasn't gone, but for a split second, a small door had opened in it. He performed the swish and flick, not as a mechanical motion, but as a natural extension of his will. Wingardium Leviosa. His voice was quiet, steady. And the feather lifted. It didn't shoot into the air. It didn't spin or sparkle. It just rose. An inch. 2 inches. It wobbled slightly, then held steady, hovering above the polished surface of the desk, perfectly still. It was the most beautiful thing Izuku had ever seen. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and sudden. He hadn't just lifted a feather. He had broken through the wall. He had taken the first real step. Professor Flitwick beamed, his smile wide and genuine. There now, he said softly, so only Izuku could hear. There it is. Well done, my boy. 10 points to Gryffindor. Izuku kept his wand pointed, his focus absolute, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. He could feel the connection, the gentle thrum of his own magic, tangible and real and his. It was a small victory, a single feather hovering a few inches from a desk in a sunlit classroom. But for Izuku Midoriya, it felt as monumental as All Might saving 100 people from a fire. It wasn't a borrowed dream or a desperate fantasy. It was his own power, born from his own heart. And it was just the beginning. The small victory in charms class was a fragile ember in the cold furnace of Izuku's anxiety. He nurtured it, replaying the moment his feather had lifted, the gentle thrum of magic answering his call. It was proof. Tangible, undeniable proof that he could do this. The wall in his mind wasn't gone, but now he knew there was a door. The key, it seemed, wasn't raw power or flawless theory, but pure, unadulterated intent. The desire to help. This realization became the new cornerstone of his entire worldview, a lens through which he began to examine every aspect of this strange, magical life. This new perspective was put to the test sooner than he expected. In the one class he had been simultaneously dreading and anticipating more than any other, defense against the dark arts. The data classroom was on the third floor, a large, airy room with windows that were often thrown open to the Scottish wind. Unlike the oppressive dungeon of potions, this room felt active and alive. Its walls were adorned with diagrams of strange creatures, charts of defensive spell trajectories, and a few slightly singed portraits of wizards who had clearly been on the losing end of a duel. Their professor was a man named Alistair Vance, a former Auror with a weary face, a slight limp, and eyes that had seen far too much. He lacked Snape's theatrical menace and Flitwick's cheerful enthusiasm. He was a man defined by a stark, pragmatic professionalism. "The dark arts are not a fairy tale," Professor Vance began, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention without needing to be raised. He paced in front of the class, his limp a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to his words. "They are not the domain of cackling villains in pointed hats. They are a force. A corruption, a will to dominate, to harm, to control. Our goal in this classroom is not to teach you how to be duelists. It is to teach you how to survive, how to protect yourselves, and more importantly, how to protect others." Izuku's quill was already moving, his mind buzzing. Protect others. This was it. This was the heart of heroism. He leaned forward, hanging on every word. "We will begin with the simplest forms of defensive magic, jinxes and counter-jinxes," Vance continued. "A jinx is a minor dark charm. Its purpose is to irritate, to incapacitate, to gain a tactical advantage. They are the foot soldiers of dark magic. Annoying, numerous, and dangerous in a swarm." He waved his wand at a dusty training dummy standing in the corner. "Locomotor Wibbly!" A thin jet of purple light shot from his wand and hit the dummy squarely in its straw-stuffed legs. Instantly, the dummy's legs began to wobble and shake as if they were made of jelly, causing it to collapse into a comical, quivering heap. A ripple of laughter went through the class. Seamus Finnegan was practically bouncing in his seat with excitement. Ron grinned, nudging Izuku. "Wicked. Fred and George used that on Percy last summer. He couldn't walk straight for an hour." "Your first practical task," Vance announced, "is to master this jinx. Pair up. One of you will cast, the other will attempt to shield. We are not using the full shield charm yet, merely a basic deflecting maneuver. Take your positions." The room erupted in a chaos of scraping chairs and excited chatter. Ron paired up with Seamus, while Hermione, with a determined look, partnered with Izuku. "All right," she said, her wand at the ready. "The textbook says the key is a sharp, downward flick of the wrist. The intent is to disrupt the target's motor functions. Let's try it on the practice cushions first." Izuku nodded, but a knot of unease was tightening in his stomach. He watched as Ron and Seamus gleefully sent purple sparks flying at each other, laughing as their cushions wobbled and fell off their desks. He saw the Slytherins, led by Draco Malfoy, practicing with a cruel, focused intensity, their jinxes sharp and accurate. The entire class seemed to view it as a game, but Izuku couldn't. His mind was already 5 steps ahead, running through scenarios from his hero analyses. He saw the jelly legs jinx not as a prank, but as a weapon. He imagined a villain using it on a civilian trying to flee a collapsing building. He imagined a hero using it on a petty thief, only for the thief to fall into traffic. He saw it being used on someone having a panic attack, their legs giving way, escalating their fear into pure terror. It was a tool to cause helplessness, a tool to inflict a specific, targeted form of suffering, however minor. "Your turn, Izuku," Hermione said, pointing her wand at a cushion in front of him. Give it a try. He raised his willow wand. He remembered Flitwick's advice. Find the intent. But what was the intent here? To make something helpless? The thought felt wrong, sour. It ran counter to the warm, protective feeling that had allowed him to lift the feather. Locomotor wibbly, he mumbled. He performed the motion, but his heart wasn't in it. The spell fizzled, producing only a sad little violet puff of smoke. You're hesitating, Hermione observed, her brow furrowed. Is it another mental block? I don't think so, Izuku said slowly, lowering his wand. It's just, we're learning to use magic to hurt people. Ron, having successfully turned Seamus's cushion into a quivering mess, overheard him. It's a jinx, Izuku, not the killing curse. It's for stopping bad guys. But how do you know they're a bad guy? Izuku countered, his muttering habit resurfacing as his thoughts tumbled out. What's the protocol for engagement? The Hero Public Safety Commission in Japan has strict guidelines on quirk usage against civilians. Lethal force is forbidden except in the most extreme circumstances, and even incapacitating quirks require justification. Using your power on someone is a serious responsibility. Are we just supposed to jinx anyone who looks threatening? What if they're not a villain, just scared, or mentally unstable? Causing them to lose control of their legs could make the situation worse, not better. There has to be a framework, a set of rules. He trailed off, realizing the whole group was staring at him. Ron looked confused. Seamus looked baffled. But Hermione's expression was one of intense, dawning comprehension. She wasn't looking at him like he was crazy. She was looking at him like he just introduced a fascinating new branch of magical law. Professor Vance's shadow fell over their desk. A problem, Mr. Midoriya? Izuku froze, expecting to be reprimanded for his hesitation. He braced himself. I'm sorry, Professor. I was just questioning the application. He risked a glance up. Vance's weary face was unreadable. Questioning is the first duty of any good Auror, the professor said, his voice even. Unthinking obedience is the domain of the other side. You raise a valid point. The decision to use force, magical or otherwise, is the heaviest one a person can make. So tell me, what is your alternative? The question was a direct challenge. Izuku's mind raced. He wasn't just a student now. He was a strategist being asked for a solution. An alternative? Well, sir, it depends on the objective. If the goal is to disarm, then a spell like Expelliarmus seems more precise and less physically invasive. If the goal is to create distance or protect a bystander, a shield charm or a levitation charm to move an object into the path of an attacker would be better. The Jelly Legs jinx seems designed for humiliation and control, not for efficient, safe neutralization of a threat. A slow, approving nod from Professor Vance. 5 points to Gryffindor, he said, his voice quiet but clear. You think like a protector, Midoriya, not a fighter. That is a rare and valuable quality. He then addressed the entire class, his voice rising again. All of you, listen up! Midoriya has raised the most important point you will learn all year. Your intent defines your magic. A levitation charm can be used to save a life or to drop a boulder on someone's head. The spell is the same. The choice is yours. Never forget that. He then turned back to Izuku. However, he added, his tone hardening slightly, you must also be practical. In a real fight, you will not have time for an ethical debate. You will have a split second to act. Sometimes, making your opponent's legs give out is the fastest way to stop them from casting a curse that could kill you or the person standing next to you. Your hesitation, while born from a noble place, could get you killed. Learn the spell. Understand its purpose. Then you can make an informed choice about when, or if, to use it. With that, he limped away, leaving Izuku with a profound sense of both validation and unease. He had been right to question it. But Vance was also right. Heroism wasn't just about having the right ideals. It was about surviving long enough to act on them. He looked at Hermione, who was now staring at him with a new level of respect. A legal and ethical framework for defensive magic, she whispered, her eyes gleaming with intellectual fire. Why isn't that a core part of the curriculum? It's a massive oversight, Izuku finally managed a weak smile. He still felt deeply uncomfortable with the jinx, but he understood its necessity now. He had found a new line, the line between ideal heroism and practical survival, and he was standing right on it. The next day, Izuku was sitting in the sunny castle courtyard, his data textbook open but his mind elsewhere. He was trying to sketch out a flowchart in his notebook, a decision tree for spell usage in a crisis situation. Is the target an immediate threat? Yes/no. Are there civilians nearby? Yes/no. It was complex, messy, and a far cry from the black and white world of good versus evil he'd grown up admiring. Is this seat taken? He looked up. A girl with a round, cheerful face, warm brown eyes, and a short bob of brown hair was smiling down at him. She was wearing the yellow and black trimmed robes of a Hufflepuff. Izuku recognized her from a few of his classes. Oh. And no, go ahead, he stammered, shuffling his books to make room on the bench. Thanks, she said, sitting down with a sigh of relief. I'm Achiko Uraraka. It's nice to meet you properly. You're Izuku Midoriya, right? The boy who made Professor Binns interesting? Izuku's face flushed. I was just asking a question. It was a great question, she said with a bright, infectious laugh. Made me actually write a note down for the first time all year. She noticed his complex flowchart. Wow. Is that for homework? It looks more complicated than my potions textbook. No, it's just a personal project, he mumbled, feeling suddenly self-conscious. Before Achiko could ask more, a group of 3 Slytherin girls strolled past. At their center was Pansy Parkinson, a girl with a pug-like face and an air of immense self-importance. She caught sight of Achiko's robes and let out a disdainful sniff. Well, Pansy sneered, stopping in front of them. If it isn't the little Hufflepuff mud dweller. What are you doing out in the sun, Uraraka? Shouldn't you be in the greenhouses, practicing your gardening spells? Achiko's cheerful demeanor tightened, but she kept a polite smile on her face. Hello, Pansy. I was just taking a break. A break from what? One of Pansy's cronies chimed in. Plotting how to use magic to do manual labor? I heard you want to be a construction worker. She said the word construction worker as if it were a foul curse. It's a noble profession, Achiko retorted, her cheeks flushing pink. My parents own a construction company, and they've fallen on hard times. I want to learn levitation charms and strengthening charms so I can help them. So I can make their work lighter and safer. Pansy let out a cruel, high-pitched laugh. How pathetic. You have the gift of magic, a power that sets you above common muggles, and you want to use it to stack bricks and pour concrete? You're dirtying your wand with muggle work. It's an embarrassment to the wizarding world. Izuku felt a familiar surge of hot, righteous anger. It was the same anger he felt whenever he saw a bully pick on someone weaker. He saw Pansy's sneering face, and for a second, it was replaced by Bakugo's. He saw Achiko's pained but determined expression, and he saw himself. He stood up. He wasn't very tall, and Pansy and her friends loomed over him, but he stood up anyway. Leave her alone, he said. His voice didn't tremble. Pansy turned her sneer on him. And who is this? Oh, the quirkless Gryffindor. Another disgrace. I'm surprised the sorting hat didn't crumble to dust when it touched your head. What are you going to do? Bore me with historical trivia. Izuku's hands clenched at his sides. His first instinct was to reach for his wand. He could try the jelly legs jinx. He could try to disarm her. The lessons from Dada flashed through his mind. Is she a threat? Are there civilians? But this wasn't a duel. This was just cruelty. Using magic here felt wrong. It would be stooping to her level, using power to intimidate, and as Professor Vance had said, his hesitation could be a weakness. But here, in the sunlit courtyard, maybe his hesitation was a strength. He took a breath and relied on the only weapon he had truly mastered over 10 years of powerlessness, his words. I was just wondering, Izuku said, his voice calm and analytical, about your definition of nobility. You think using magic to bully someone is a more noble pursuit than using it to build a home for a family? You think it's more worthy to use this gift to cause pain than to ease a burden? He looked directly at Pansy. My friend wants to use her magic to help her parents, to build things, to create safety. You're using your magic to, what? Feel superior for a few minutes? Which one of those sounds like a waste? The directness and simple logic of his argument caught the Slytherins completely off guard. They were prepared for insults, for a pathetic attempt at a jinx. They were not prepared for a calm, rational deconstruction of their own prejudice. Pansy's face went from smug to furious. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. She was flustered, her own cruelty laid bare and examined like a bug under a microscope. Whatever, she finally spat, unable to come up with a better response. Come on. Let's not waste our time with the Gryffindor mudlover and his Hufflepuff charity case. She and her friends swept away, their arrogant swagger looking slightly less confident than before. Izuku let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding and sat back down, his legs feeling a bit wobbly. Achiko was staring at him, her brown eyes wide with astonishment and gratitude. Wow, she breathed. Nobody's ever stood up to Pansy like that for me. Not without wands anyway. Thank you, Izuku, it was nothing, he said, his face turning red again. I can't stand people who look down on others for wanting to help. A huge grin spread across Achiko's face. We're kind of the same, aren't we? She said, her voice full of excitement. She leaned in conspiratorially. My goal is to make enough money as a magical contractor so my parents can finally relax and have an easy life. It's not a very glamorous dream, like being an Auror or the Minister for Magic, so most people think it's silly. It's not silly at all, Izuku insisted, his own passion ignited by hers. That's one of the most heroic goals I've ever heard. Using your power to protect your family, to give them a better life, that's the whole point, isn't it? Saving people isn't always about fighting giant monsters. Sometimes it's about making sure people have a safe home to sleep in. As he spoke, he felt Achiko's own excitement bubble over. She clasped her hands together, a faint blush on her cheeks. Exactly! When you put it like that, it makes me feel all floaty. They sat there for another hour talking. Izuku, for the first time, explained his dream not just to a magical native like Ron, but to someone who seemed to exist in the same space between worlds as he did. He talked about All Might, about the symbol of peace, and about his struggle to reconcile that ideal with the hidden, subtle world of magic. Achiko listened, completely engrossed. She, in turn, described the intricacies of her parents' business, the way a properly cast strengthening charm could triple the load-bearing capacity of a steel beam, how a controlled levitation charm could move materials on a construction site with zero risk of accidents. He was learning about a new kind of heroism. A quiet, practical, Hufflepuff brand of heroism. It was about building, not breaking. About supporting, not fighting. And as he walked back to Gryffindor Tower later that afternoon, he felt that the foundation of his own dream had become a little bit wider, and a lot more stable. The day's fragile sense of peace was not destined to last. That evening, as Izuku was walking back from a late session in the library, he took a shortcut through a dark, deserted corridor on the second floor. The flickering torchlight cast long, dancing shadows that made the suits of armor look like silent, waiting sentinels. A figure stepped out from behind a tapestry, blocking his path. Izuku's heart leaped into his throat. It was Katsuki Bakugo. Well, Bakugo growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that echoed in the stone corridor. Look what we have here! Little Deku all alone. He wasn't with his Slytherin cronies. He was by himself, which was somehow even more terrifying. His red eyes, gleaming in the torchlight, were fixed on Izuku with an unnerving intensity. Izuku's hand instinctively went to the wand in his pocket. The wood felt cool and solid, a small reassurance. What do you want, Kakin? Bakugo let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. I heard about you and Dada today. Asking the professor stupid questions. What if they're not a villain? What if they're just scared? He mocked Izuku's voice, turning it into a pathetic, whining squeak. You're in a world of wizards and dark magic, and you're still trying to play the part of the useless little counselor. He took a step forward, and Izuku took a step back, his back hitting the cold, unyielding stone wall. Trapped. The old fear, primal and immediate, washed over him. I also heard about your little performance in the courtyard. Bakugo continued, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, as he closed the remaining distance. Standing up to Pansy Parkinson with your big words. You think that makes you a hero? He slammed a hand against the wall next to Izuku's head. The sound boomed like a gunshot in the silent corridor. It was a non-magical act of pure, physical intimidation. It was a language Izuku understood all too well. It was the language of his entire childhood. You're pathetic, Bakugo hissed, his face inches from Izuku's. The smell of burnt sugar and ozone, a strange side effect of Bakugo's quirk, clung to him even here. You get a taste of this magic crap, and what do you do with it? You focus on levitating feathers and defending Hufflepuff losers who want to play in the dirt. You're obsessed with defensive spells and rescue fantasies. You're just as weak here as you were back home. Izuku trembled, his eyes wide, pinned by Bakugo's furious gaze. He tried to speak, but his throat was tight with fear. A real hero finishes the fight, Bakugo snarled, poking a hard finger into Izuku's chest. A real hero dominates. They win. They stand at the top, and no one can touch them. That's what this power is for. It's a tool to be the best. But you're trying to turn it into a first aid kit. You think these parlor tricks will make you a hero? You'll always be a pebble on the side of the road, Deku. A useless little rock that everyone steps on their way to greatness. The words were like acid, dissolving the fragile confidence he had spent the last few weeks building. Every insecurity, every fear, every moment of failure came rushing back. The fizzled spells, the ruined potion, the mandrake slipping from his grasp. Maybe Bakugo was right. Maybe he was just polishing a pebble, pretending it was a diamond. But then, something else stirred within him. A new feeling born from Professor Vance's grudging respect, from Hermione's intellectual fire, from Machiko's bright and earnest gratitude. It was a spark of defiance. He was still afraid. His body was trembling, his palms were sweating. But he met Bakugo's glare. You're wrong, Izuku whispered, his voice shaky but clear. Bakugo's eyes widened slightly in surprise, then narrowed in fury. What did you say, you damn nerd? You're wrong, Izuku repeated, a little louder this time. Being a hero isn't about dominating people. It's about protecting them. All Might doesn't win because he's the strongest. He wins because he gives people hope. He makes them feel safe. He took a shaky breath. I'm not trying to be the best. I'm just trying to be good enough to save someone. And if that makes me a pebble, then that's fine. I'll be the best pebble I can be. For a moment Bakugo was utterly speechless. He stared at Izuku, a complex storm of emotions warring in his eyes, rage, disbelief, and something else, something that looked almost like confusion. He had expected Izuku to cry, to crumble, to apologize. He had not expected this quiet, stubborn resolve. He pulled back his hand from the wall. "Tch," he scoffed, the sound full of disgust. "Whatever. Keep playing your stupid little hero games, Deku. We'll see how far your pretty words get you when you're facing something real." He turned and stalked away, his black and green Slytherin robes sweeping behind him, leaving Izuku alone in the flickering torchlight. Izuku sagged against the wall, his legs finally giving out as he slid to the floor. His heart was still jackhammering in his chest. He was shaking from head to toe. He had been terrified. But he hadn't broken. He had faced the specter of his past, the voice that had defined his powerlessness for years, and he had answered it. He looked down at his own hands. They were still trembling, but they felt different. They were the hands that had fumbled with a mandrake, that had ruined a potion, that had made a feather float. They were the hands that belonged to a boy who wanted to be a hero, but was learning that the lines of heroism were drawn not with power, but with purpose. And for the first time, he felt like he was the one holding the pen. The days leading up to Halloween were filled with a nervous, festive energy that permeated every stone of Hogwarts castle. Pumpkins the size of armchairs, magically grown by Hagrid, appeared on the castle grounds. The great hall was festooned with live bats that fluttered lazily among the floating candles, and the suits of armor were enchanted to tell terribly cheesy jokes to anyone who passed by. For most students, it was a time of excitement, of looking forward to the legendary Halloween feast. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a time of intense, focused study. The confrontation with Bakugo had left an indelible mark on him. It had been terrifying, but it had also been clarifying. Bakugo's philosophy was simple: power was a weapon for domination. Izuku's was solidifying into its opposite: power was a tool for protection. This fundamental schism drove him deeper into his books, deeper into his notebooks. He wasn't just learning spells anymore. He was building an arsenal of rescue techniques. He spent hours in the library with Hermione, poring over texts far beyond their first-year curriculum. While she devoured books on advanced magical theory and the history of wizarding law, he searched for practical, non-combative spells. He found the freezing charm, Immobilis, and filled 3 pages with notes on its potential to stabilize crumbling structures or stop a runaway vehicle. He discovered the cushioning charm, Spungify, and theorized about its use in creating emergency landing pads for people falling from a great height. Ron, for his part, found their study habits both baffling and admirable. He would often join them, mostly to copy their homework, but also to offer a running commentary that was surprisingly insightful in its own way. "So you're saying," Ron said one afternoon, peering over Izuku's shoulder at a complex diagram, "you could use Spungify on the ground and then Wingardium Leviosa on the person falling to slow them down a bit, and they'd probably survive? Blimey. You're thinking about this stuff like you're planning a Gringotts heist." "It's about preparedness," Izuku muttered, sketching a new variation. "A hero has to be ready for any contingency. The more options you have, the more people you can save." Hermione nodded in agreement, not looking up from a thick tome titled Quintessential Quidditch Spells, a defensive analysis. "Preparation is the foundation of success. It's foolish to rely on improvisation alone." Their dynamic, once an unlikely trio, had become a solid, supportive unit. Ron's loyalty and down-to-earth perspective grounded them. Hermione's encyclopedic knowledge and logical mind provided the structure, and Izuku's relentless, analytical drive gave them their purpose. However, even as their friendship deepened, Izuku noticed a shadow creeping into Hermione's usual confident demeanor. He noticed it in the slight slump of her shoulders when she thought no one was looking, in the way she would sometimes fall silent in the middle of a vibrant discussion. The source of it, he soon realized, was the persistent, insidious prejudice of the pureblood elite. It wasn't just Pansy Parkinson's open mockery. It was subtler. It was the way Slytherin students would whisper, "Mudblood," as she passed, a word so vile that Ron had nearly gotten into a fistfight the first time he'd heard it directed at her. It was the way some students from older, pureblood families in other houses would pointedly ignore her brilliant answers in class. They saw her not as the brightest witch of her age, but as an upstart, a pretender whose non-magical heritage was a stain on the world she so desperately wanted to belong to. On Halloween afternoon, things came to a head. Izuku and Ron were heading to the Great Hall for the feast, their spirits high. The scent of roasted pumpkin and cinnamon filled the air, but Hermione was nowhere to be found. "That's weird," Ron said, craning his neck to look around the crowded entrance hall. "She's never late for a meal. Especially not a feast." It was Neville Longbottom who provided the answer. He found them near the grand staircase, his round face pale with distress. "It's Hermione," he whispered, wringing his hands. "I saw her running off ages ago." "She was crying." Izuku's stomach dropped. "Crying? Why? What happened?" "It was in the charms corridor," Neville explained, his voice trembling slightly. "Malfoy and his lot, Crabbe and Goyle. They were with some older Slytherins. They cornered her, called her that awful name. And one of the older ones, a 5th year, said that magic was wasted on her kind, that her blood was dirty, and she'd never be a real witch." A cold fury settled in Izuku's chest. He had seen this kind of cruelty his entire life. The powerful targeting the vulnerable, not with fists, but with words designed to cut deeper than any blade. "They said she should just go back to her muggle world where she belongs," Neville finished miserably. "She just dropped her books and ran. I think she went to the girls' toilets, the one on the first floor that's always out of order. We have to go find her," Izuku said immediately, his voice tight. "Right," Ron agreed, his face grim, his fists clenched. "I'll give that Malfoy a piece of my mind." But before they could move, the great oak doors of the Great Hall burst open. Professor Quirrell, their stammering, turban-wearing defense against the dark arts teacher, Professor Vance only taught the upper years, sprinted into the hall, his face a mask of sheer terror. "Troll!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with panic. Troll! In the dungeons! Thought you ought to know. And then, in a dead faint, he collapsed onto the floor. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, the hall erupted into pandemonium. Students screamed, chairs toppled, and a wave of panic washed through the room. Silence! Dumbledore's voice boomed through the hall, magically amplified. The chaos subsided into a terrified, whimpering hush. Prefects, Dumbledore said, his voice calm and commanding. Lead your houses back to the dormitories immediately. Teachers, you will follow me to the dungeons. Percy Weasley, his chest puffed out with self-importance, began barking orders at the Gryffindors. This way! Stay in a group! No need to panic! Izuku, Ron, and the other first-years were swept up in the tide of students heading for Gryffindor Tower. But as they were pushed and jostled along the corridor, a single, horrifying thought sliced through Izuku's mind. He stopped dead, grabbing Ron's arm. Ron stumbled, turning to him with a confused look. What is it, Izuku? Izuku's face was pale, his green eyes wide with dawning horror. Hermione, he breathed. She doesn't know. She's not in the Great Hall. She's still in the girls' toilet. Ron's freckles stood out starkly against his suddenly white face. The one on the first floor. The troll is in the dungeons, Izuku said, his mind racing, pulling together the pieces with terrifying speed. But to get to the dungeons from the main entrance, you have to pass the first floor. What if it's not in the dungeons anymore? What if it wandered? She's all alone. She's a sitting duck. The reality of the situation crashed down on them. While the entire school was being herded to safety, their friend was alone, unaware, and directly in the path of a fully grown mountain troll. There was no choice. There wasn't even a debate. Their eyes met, and in that split second, they shared the same thought. They couldn't tell Percy. He'd never let them go. They couldn't find a teacher. It would take too long. They had to go themselves. Breaking away from the throng of students, they ducked down a side corridor, their footsteps echoing in the suddenly empty castle. They ran, their hearts pounding in a frantic rhythm of fear and adrenaline. Fear for themselves, but a far greater fear for their friend. As they neared the first-floor corridor, a smell hit them. It was a foul, gag-inducing stench, a mixture of old socks, unwashed bodies, and something vaguely rotten, like a public toilet that hadn't been cleaned in a century. Ugh, that's gotta be it, Ron whispered, pinching his nose. They peered around the corner. The sight that greeted them was one of pure, nightmarish chaos. A 12-foot monster stood there, its skin the color of dull granite, its body lumpy and misshapen like a boulder with arms and legs. It had a tiny, bald head and short, thick legs that ended in large, horny feet. In its hand, it wielded a massive wooden club, which it dragged along the stone floor, leaving a deep gouge in its wake. The troll was swaying on the spot, grunting, its tiny, stupid eyes peering around. It took a step towards the girls' toilets, sniffing the air. Then they heard it. A faint, terrified scream from within the bathroom. Hermione. Without a second thought, Izuku acted. He grabbed a loose piece of rubble from a crumbling statue and hurled it with all his might against the opposite wall. Clang! The sound echoed down the corridor. The troll, slow and dim-witted, turned its head towards the noise, its tiny eyes trying to process the new stimulus. It had worked. It was distracted. Come on! Izuku hissed, pulling Ron along as they scrambled into the bathroom. The scene inside was devastating. The troll's previous rampage had shattered the sinks and splintered the wooden toilet stalls. Water was gushing from broken pipes, flooding the floor. And cowering against the far wall, her face streaked with tears, petrified with fear, was Hermione. She was backed into a corner, with nowhere to run. Hermione, move! Ron yelled. But she was frozen, her wide, terrified eyes locked on the enormous shape that was now lumbering through the doorway, its bulk filling the entire frame. The troll saw them. It let out a low, rumbling roar, a sound that vibrated in their chests. It raised its club, its small eyes fixed on Hermione, the easiest, most vulnerable target. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku's mind, which had been a whirlwind of panic, suddenly became crystal clear. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in his stomach, but his analytical brain took over, just as it had countless times when watching videos of All Might. He wasn't seeing a monster anymore. He was seeing a problem to be solved. An equation of variables and outcomes. Target analysis, mountain troll, his mind supplied, as if reading from one of his notebooks. Height, approximate 12 feet. Weight, approximate 1 ton. Strengths, immense physical power, high durability. Weaknesses, low intelligence, slow movement, poor agility, high center of gravity. His eyes darted around the room, cataloging every detail. The smashed sinks. The splintered wood from the stalls. The gushing water flooding the floor. The network of copper pipes crisscrossing the ceiling. He couldn't fight it. That was a fool's errand. A direct magical assault would be like throwing pebbles at a battleship. Even if he managed a perfect jelly legs jinx, the troll would just fall and crush one of them. They couldn't win with power. They had to win with strategy. Ron! Izuku's voice was sharp, clear, cutting through the terrified haze. The pipes! On the ceiling! Use Wingardium Leviosa! Distract it! Aim for its head! Ron, who had been frozen in indecision, snapped to attention. An order. A clear, actionable plan. That he could do. Right! He yelled, raising his wand. Wingardium Leviosa! He aimed at a loose section of copper pipe. It creaked, groaned, and then ripped free from its fittings, hovering in the air. With a great heave of will, Ron sent it hurtling towards the troll's head. The pipe clanged loudly against the troll's thick skull. It wasn't enough to injure it, but it was startling. The troll grunted in annoyance, its tiny eyes swiveling away from Hermione to glare at Ron. It had taken the bait. Hermione! Izuku shouted, turning his attention to her. She was still frozen, but her eyes were on him now. The floor! The water on the floor! Cast the freezing charm! Make it ice! Aim for the space right in front of it. The freezing charm, Immobilis, was a spell she had perfected, one she'd read about in Standard Book of Spells, Grade 2. The logic of the command, using the environment, creating a trap, broke through her fear. Her brilliant mind latched onto the strategy. She raised her wand, her hand trembling but her voice surprisingly steady. Immobilis! A jet of pale blue light shot from her wand and hit the flooded floor in front of the troll. The effect was instantaneous. A large patch of the floor transformed into a sheet of slick, glistening ice. The troll, its attention still on Ron, took a lumbering step forward to smash him with its club. Its enormous, horny foot landed squarely on the ice. For a comical, terrifying second, the troll's legs shot out from under it. Its arms windmilled wildly as it fought for balance. Its immense weight and high center of gravity, the very things that made it so formidable, became its greatest weaknesses. It was going down. This was his chance. The final piece of the puzzle. Izuku saw the troll's trajectory, the way it was falling backward, its club swinging wildly. He saw the moment of vulnerability. He had to immobilize it completely. Not just its legs, but its entire body. He needed another freezing charm, but a full-body one, targeted and powerful. He remembered Flitwick's lesson. Find the intent. A small, good thing. But this wasn't a small, good thing. This was a huge, terrifying thing. He needed a different kind of intent. He needed the feeling he got when he watched All Might. The desperate, burning need to protect. The will to stand in the face of overwhelming odds and declare, "It's fine now." Why? Because I am here. He wasn't All Might. He didn't have that power. But he had the heart. He had the resolve. He poured every ounce of his fear, his desperation, his fierce, protective love for his friends into his next spell. He pictured his friends safe. He pictured the troll neutralized, the threat ended. That was his goal. Protection. He raised his willow wand, the wood thrumming with an energy he had never felt before. It was a powerful, surging current, answering the call of his unwavering will. Immobilis! He screamed, his voice raw. It wasn't a jet of light that erupted from his wand. It was a wave. A wide, shimmering, brilliant green wave of magic, the color of his own eyes, the color of his own heroic spirit. It washed over the falling troll in a silent, powerful cascade. The troll froze. mid-fall. Its expression was locked in a grunt of surprise. Its club was held aloft, inches from smashing into the ceiling. One leg was still flailing in the air. It was a perfect, 12-foot statue of granite and stupidity, held in place by a magic far more powerful than any first year should have been able to muster. Silence descended upon the destroyed bathroom, broken only by the sound of dripping water and the ragged, desperate gasps of 3 children. Izuku stood panting, his arm outstretched, his wand held steady for the first time in a real crisis. His entire body trembled with magical exhaustion, but he held the spell. Ron stared, his mouth agape, his own wand forgotten at his side. Hermione was looking at Izuku, her tear-filled eyes wide with a mixture of terror, relief, and pure, unadulterated awe. He didn't win with power. He won with strategy. He won with teamwork. He won with his mind. He had analyzed the enemy, identified its weaknesses, utilized his team's strengths, and controlled the environment. He had been a hero. The moment was shattered by the sound of running footsteps and shouting. The bathroom door burst open, and 3 teachers swept in, Professor McGonagall, Professor Snape, and a still shaky Professor Quirrell. They stopped dead, their expressions of grim determination melting into utter shock. They took in the scene, the shattered sinks, the flooded floor, the patch of ice, and at the center of it all, a fully grown mountain troll, frozen solid in a ridiculous, off-balance pose. And standing before it were 3 first-year students, looking terrified but very much alive. McGonagall's eyes, wide behind her square spectacles, darted from the troll to the 3 of them. Snape's black eyes narrowed, a flicker of disbelief crossing his usually impassive face. "Explain," McGonagall said, her voice barely a whisper. Then, finding her composure, she repeated, her tone sharp as broken glass. "Explain yourselves." Now, before Izuku or Ron could speak, Hermione stepped forward. "It was my fault, Professor McGonagall," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Everyone, including Snape, looked at her in surprise. "I went looking for the troll." Hermione lied, her quick mind concocting a plausible story to protect her friends. "I'd read about them, and I thought I could handle it myself. I was wrong. If Izuku and Ron hadn't come to find me, I'd be dead." McGonagall stared at her, her lips a thin, hard line. It was a terrible lie, but a brave one. Izuku opened his mouth to protest, to tell the truth, but Ron shot him a look that said, "Let her." "Be that as it may, Miss Granger," McGonagall said, her tone severe. "That was an exceedingly foolish thing to do. I am very disappointed in you. 5 points will be taken from Gryffindor for your serious lack of judgment." She then turned her gaze to Izuku and Ron. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "But to run toward a fully grown mountain troll, instead of away from it, that requires a loyalty and bravery not seen every day. 50 points, she declared, a hint of pride in her voice, will be awarded to Gryffindor. Each. For sheer, dumb luck and exceptional courage." Snape made a small, choke sound in the back of his throat, but said nothing. McGonagall sent Hermione and Ron to the hospital wing with Madame Pomfrey, just to be safe. But she held Izuku back for a moment. She looked at the frozen troll, then at him. "Midoriya," she said, her voice softer now. "The spell you used, a full-body freezing charm of that magnitude, that is not first-year magic. I read about it, Professor," Izuku stammered, his exhaustion making it hard to think straight. I didn't want my friends to get hurt." She looked at him, her gaze penetrating. She saw the sincerity in his wide, green eyes, the lingering fear, the exhaustion. She saw the boy who had questioned the ethics of a simple jinx, who now stood before a testament to his own incredible defensive power. "See that you get to the hospital wing," she said finally, a flicker of a rare, small smile on her lips. "Dumbledore will want to speak with you tomorrow." Later that night, in the hospital wing, the 3 of them were tucked into beds, sipping on hot, sweet chocolate provided by a bustling Madame Pomfrey. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a strange sense of unreality. "I still can't believe we did it," Ron said for the 10th time, staring at the ceiling. "We took down a mountain troll. We didn't take it down," Hermione corrected softly from her bed. She was looking at Izuku, her eyes shining with gratitude. You did, Izuku. Your plan. It was brilliant. You were like a Quidditch captain calling a play. You saw everything. Izuku's face flushed. It wasn't just me. It wouldn't have worked without you and Ron. I just analyzed the situation. It's what I do. No, Hermione insisted. It's more than that. The way you looked, when you cast that final spell. You weren't just casting a spell. You were being a hero. Her words hit him with a surprising force. He looked at his hands. They didn't feel useless anymore. They had been part of a team that had faced an impossible threat and won. Bakugo's words echoed in his mind. We'll see how far your pretty words get you when you're facing something real. Well, he had faced something real. And his way, the way of analysis, teamwork, and protection, had worked. The curtains around his bed swished open. Albus Dumbledore stood there, his long silver beard tucked into his belt, his half-moon spectacles perched on his nose. His blue eyes, usually twinkling with amusement, were serious and thoughtful. A rather eventful Halloween, wouldn't you agree, Mr. Midoriya? He said, his voice calm and gentle. Izuku sat up straighter. Professor Dumbledore, sir. Professor McGonagall told me what happened. Dumbledore continued, his gaze piercing. She told me about your unique approach to problem-solving. It seems you favor strategy over brute force. I'm not very good at the powerful spells, sir, Izuku admitted. I just did what I thought was best to keep my friends safe. Ah, yes, Dumbledore said, a smile finally touching his lips. To keep others safe. A noble and powerful motivation. Far more powerful, I find, than the desire for glory or control. He paused, his eyes drifting towards the window, as if looking at something far away. There are many kinds of magic, Mr. Midoriya. The kind that shatters and destroys is often the loudest, the most noticed. But the kind that protects, that shields, that preserves, that is a different, but no less potent, kind of magic. It is a magic born not of the mind, but of the heart. And it seems your heart is very strong indeed. Dumbledore's words were like a balm on his weary soul. It was the ultimate validation. The headmaster of Hogwarts, one of the most powerful wizards in the world, was telling him that his way had merit. As Dumbledore was about to leave, he hesitated. I believe a friend of yours is waiting outside. He seems rather concerned. The headmaster swept away, and a moment later, the curtain opened again. Standing there was Toshinori Yagi, looking even more skeletal and worried than usual. Young Midoriya, he said, his voice a relieved sigh. I came as soon as I heard. A troll? In the school? All might. Izuku breathed, his heart skipping a beat. I'm okay. We're all okay. Toshinori pulled up a chair, his sunken eyes scanning Izuku, checking for injuries. Dumbledore told me the gist of it. He said you didn't fight it. You outthought it. Izuku nodded, a blush creeping up his neck. I analyzed its weaknesses and used the environment. Toshinori was silent for a long moment, his gaze intense. Izuku squirmed, worried he had somehow disappointed his idol. But when Toshinori spoke, his voice was thick with an emotion Izuku couldn't quite place. It sounded like pride. When I told you that you could find a new way to be a hero, Toshinori said slowly, I will admit, I did not know what that would look like. I wondered if you would become a powerful aura like your father, or a great healer. But this is something else entirely. Something new. He leaned forward, and for a moment, Izuku could see the shadow of All Might in his gaunt frame. You used your greatest weapon tonight, Izuku. And it wasn't your wand. It was your mind, the same mind that filled all those notebooks. You proved that heroism isn't about the size of your spell, but the size of your heart, and the sharpness of your strategy. You were a true hero tonight. Toshinori reached out and placed a bony, surprisingly warm hand on Izuku's shoulder. It wasn't the passing of a torch. It wasn't the gift of a quirk. It was something quieter, deeper. It was an acknowledgement, an acceptance. As Toshinori left, a thought struck Izuku. He remembered the troll's odd behavior, its convenient appearance on Halloween, Professor Quirrell's sudden, theatrical faint. Something felt off. Staged. He thought back to something else, something he had pushed to the back of his mind. All Might, wait! He called out. Toshinori paused at the curtain. When you were talking to Professor Dumbledore, before you came in, did you happen to mention a name? Silas Blackwood? The change in Toshinori's demeanor was instantaneous and chilling. The warmth vanished, replaced by a grim, professional seriousness. The air in the hospital wings suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Where did you hear that name, young Midoriya? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. Izuku knew, with absolute certainty, that he had just stumbled upon a truth far more dangerous than any mountain troll.